you all here today to have a bit of a chat about restorative classrooms and how they manifest if we get restorative practices right as strong classrooms. I'm excited about today, and I'm not trying to do some big Kev impersonation on you there, but I'm excited because we cracked the ton today. So I was really, really excited to find out that we had 100 teachers today. So 100 people who have decided that it's important enough that we have restorative and strong classrooms to give up a little bit of your time. And I want to acknowledge that we have various motivations for having jumped onto the webinar today. So it might be that when you saw the heading for today that you thought, you know what, I know a bit about this restorative practices thing, I'd like to know a little bit more. It might be the strong part of it is your motivation for getting involved here, because there's certainly a feeling amongst the young people that I work with, and also amongst the schools that I work with, that there's some strength missing from our classrooms. There are some behaviours that are being tolerated in our classrooms that aren't exactly conducive to fantastic learning environments. And so what we need to do is to start to get really clear about how we establish strong classrooms, because one of the things that we're fighting when we try to bring back some strength into our classrooms is certainly the notion that bringing it back by force, by just trying to be incredibly strong ourselves, is somewhat counterproductive. And then we might have some people who've joined us today because they saw that little tagline underneath about how to build respect, resilience and responsibility through restorative practices. And I put that in there because I'm really mindful that for me they're the what's, they're the outcomes that we get, and restorative practices is the process, it's the how. And so what you'll notice today is that throughout, while we're talking about restorative practices, you won't hear me a great deal talk about respect, resilience and responsibility, and I don't mean to disappoint you in that regard, but what I want to do is to tell you that sometimes I think when we focus really hard on respect, resilience and responsibility as something that we want, we strain for it, thinking about the outcome we're looking for without thinking about the process. And today really is about the process. Today is about how, that first word in that tagline. It's about how we're going to get there, rather than just hoping that it's going to happen through some sort of osmosis or through merely demanding that our young people are more respectful, more resilient and more responsible in the way that they conduct themselves in our schools. So I want to welcome you all. I want to say a special welcome to our as much as I sound like an air hostess when I do this, I want to say a special welcome to our partners and our member schools. You're really important and critical people to us. So thank you so much for not only buying into the Rural Schools mission of building really successful cultures, and it's that culture thing that we're actually really big on here. When I mentioned before, it's behaviours that we tolerate that are a problem. Where our definition of culture that we use is that it's merely a set of behaviours that are both encouraged and tolerated. So it's about how we encourage the behaviours we're looking at, and then certainly how we confront the behaviours that we wish to no longer tolerate. And our partners and members are very much bought into how they're going to do something about that. And I also want to welcome you if you're a first timer, if this is your first go at a Real Schools webinar on a Thursday afternoon. I want to say welcome aboard. It's great to have you here, and to that effect I just want to give you the brief hosty safety instruction message that tells you a little bit about what that dashboard is, what that control panel is that's on your screen at the moment, because this is a webinar, this isn't a video that you're watching. We are live, and you have absolutely every opportunity to engage today throughout our webinar. And in fact, when we're talking about restorative practices, it's actually really important that you do get that opportunity, because it's not easy. There isn't a quick fix here, and I get the opportunity to ask a lot of people, do you think there's a silver bullet? And as much as we're conditioned through media and through, some of the wonderful know-it-alls that you'll meet at barbecues, that if I only did this in schools, if they only did it the way they did when I was a boy, then everything would be fine. We know that there's no one answer. We know that there's no one singular silver bullet that we can deploy here to be able to get the type of restorative and strong classrooms that we're looking for. So let's talk about it. So let's make sure that today, that if you do have something that you want to say, that you pop a question in. I'm going to do my very best to keep an eye on that question box, and if there is something that bobs up in there that you want to ask or you want to chat about, then you can use those questions or chat sections that are available to you, and you can also put your hand up. This is a virtual classroom, and we've got the facility here to do that really politely too. So you do have the chance to make sure that you can put your hand up and ask a question, and I'm going to keep an eye out in that section also. So if there's something that you do want to discuss as we're moving ahead today, then make sure that you do put your hand up. What I can do is unmute you, and when we get the next opportunity, we'll do whatever we possibly can to hear what your questions are. To that effect, I'll also provide a little question time right at the end. So if you would prefer to be someone who stores up that question in the hope that it gets answered on the way, then you are more than welcome to, but you're also very welcome to put your hand up and to interrupt as we move forward. All right, so let's get cracking with our webinar. So what I first want to acknowledge today is that this experience when we're talking about restorative practices can be like drinking from a garden hose. It can be really difficult. It can feel like there's all sorts of information coming at you, and in fact I'm going to be directing all sorts of information straight at you. So it's going to feel a bit like some of it's going to land, some of it's going to get in your mouth, and it's going to feel from time to time like, you know what, some of it misses and some of it's all around you, and that's okay, because what we've got around restorative practices, I guess for me, I've been using restorative practices in schools now for around about 12 or 15 years now, and I still feel like I'm getting better at it. I still feel like occasionally by revisiting I'm picking up a wonderful nugget and running with it and discovering something new about it. In fact, it wasn't so long ago that a teacher told me that, Adam, you've got to stop talking to people about balancing firmness and fairness, because she said you're giving people the impression that they need to sacrifice one for the other. And she's absolutely spot on. I never thought about it like that before, and it really caused me to think that what we're talking about is getting a high level of firmness and a high level of fairness, which I think is it would be really an aspirational but a difficult thing to do. And that means that we do need to acknowledge that some of today in a 1-hour webinar will land and some of it will miss, and to want, you know what, I'm quite unapologetic about that. I'm going to fly today. I sat down over the last week or so to really plan what the content was that we were going to cover today, and I just found so many things I wanted to say and that I didn't want to eliminate. So it drove me a little bit crazy trying to work out what it was that I was not going to include today, but what I was going to leave out. So I'm just going to move fast. I'm just going to fly. I'm just going to leave as much as I can in there, and then I'm going to give you some opportunity at the very end of the webinar today to I'll give you an opportunity to find out how you can do more, how you can find out more, how you can get involved more, and how you can do more and learn more for your school. So there we go. It's going to feel like drinking from a garden hose today. We're going to be messy. We're going to make a mess, but we'll be absolutely fine. So let's get into finding out today why it is that you're here. So what I want to do today first is find out a little more about you. I want to check in. So part of doing a restorative practice, being a restorative practices classroom, is that you will include some check-in opportunities and check-in circles. So I want to check in too. I want to find out who you are. I want to find out what the hat is that you're wearing today. So I'm going to launch a poll here to start to get you guys involved. And the poll asks which hat you're wearing today and whether you are a primary teacher or a middle or a secondary ed teacher, whether you're a special ed teacher. You might be here in a school or a team leader type position, thinking about how you can help people at a very practical level to be able to build restorative classrooms across your school. And you might be in a support role. I've been really excited to find some people lately who've been attending our webinars who are in that student support or school support or tutoring or ISA type role, and it's fabulous to have those people on board, because as we know, one of the most important things around RP is consistency, and having inconsistency and missing training opportunities for our school support and tutoring type people can really be an anchor on creating a genuinely restorative atmosphere or culture around your classroom. So right there that we've had nearly 80% of our people vote there, so what I might do in just a couple of seconds is close off that poll and share those results with you. There we go. I'll close there and share the results. So what you can see is we've got more than half of our people today are primary school teachers. I'm going to keep that in mind. And we've got some we've got some school leaders as well. And like I mentioned, we've got our school support people who are online today, which really heartens me. It's great to have those people here. So welcome to those almost a bit more than 1 in 5 people who have come along in that type of role today. So that's good. That gives me a little bit of an idea of where we're at today and who the people are who are in our classroom today, and I'll definitely do my absolute best to tailor what we're doing today to work with you. So I'm just going to do a quick check-in on my questions here. Okay, so we've got a couple of people who are engaging there. I don't think we've got a chat phone. Okay, I'm hoping that we've got Mark there able to get involved there and making some comments as we go. We're going to scoop up your questions and your comments towards the end of the webinar too. So if I don't actually get to your specific question, then know that I certainly will in time. Andy, I'm hoping you've worked out now how to put your hand up, but I'm not going to hassle you about that unless I actually see your hand. All right, let's get cracking with restorative practices, guys. The first thing I want to let you know about today is that in the time that we do have with us, I've got a real determination to be Mythbuster. So what I am trying to do is to tell you that I think that there are, as much as I love restorative practices, I think that there are some times that I need to be critical of the way that it is rolled out in schools, and I'm certainly worried about a couple of myths that are perpetuated through schools that aren't getting this restorative stuff right. And whenever I speak to schools that are thinking about going down the restorative journey, there are often 2 myths that we need to get very tough about being determined to bust. And you know what? If I don't actually bust those myths in my time with you today, then I don't think I've done a very good job, and you should probably be telling me about it. So the first myth that I want to bust is that it's too soft and fuzzy. Is that this whole restorative stuff is about getting kids together, forcing fake apologies, and then sending kids off with very little likelihood of the behaviour either changing, improving, or disappearing altogether. And so that's the first myth that I need to very much address today. So where we'll talk about there is the notion of what happens and how you can apply restorative consequences in a meaningful and relevant way. And that's a really important sentence that I'm hoping that you'll take out of today, is that some people get the idea that because restorative practices is based in conversation and is based in being responsible for harm and relationships, that means that there's no consequences that can be applied. And that's not actually the case at all. But what it does say to us is that if we are going to apply consequences or punishments, because to be honest, we're talking about very similar concepts there. And in fact, the truth is probably that we just became a bit uncomfortable with the word punishment, so we started calling it consequences in our schools. But if we are going to apply punishments or consequences, they have to be delivered in a way that gives us a chance of changing our behaviour, either in the short term or the long term. So I want to talk through that idea because, to be honest, when we do go down, we've been giving a punitive approach to working with young people a really good go now for, well, let's be honest, maybe 150 to 200 years in our schools. We need to be really clear about why we need to move away from what we would call a punitive or an adversarial model and towards a restorative model. And there are a few fundamental reasons for that. Number one is that it damages the student-teacher relationship to apply consequences arbitrarily. So what we find in that situation is that we need to think about, for that second point here, that it creates negative thinking. So what happens when we apply a consequence or a punishment arbitrarily is that young person, it creates a set of self-talk within that young person that we need to have our eyes open to. So if 2 kids in your class come in after lunch and they've had a bit of a scrap, and we sort of believe one story partly and then one story seems completely illogical and unbelievable, then we'll go largely with the first person. We might give them a bit of a warning for their role in it, and the other kid who, this has been happening a fair bit with, might get a couple of lunchtimes inside. When we run with that, what we do is we need to think about what the thinking is that we're creating at that point. So as they sit in the corner or as they sit inside at lunchtime and they're writing their lines, we need to wonder whether they're actually thinking, Mr. Voigt's probably right. My behaviour does need to improve, and I really need to reflect on that and move forward and learn my lesson for next time. And the truth is, unfortunately, that's not what they're thinking. They're often thinking really damaging and negative things about us. They might be thinking about how they can take revenge upon the kid who hasn't cost the same level of consequence or punishment. And none of that thinking is likely to lead towards a positive change in behaviour. One of the things we do know about behaviour is that behaviour almost never I think we can probably safely say actually never. Behaviour never changes in isolation. It never changes just on its own. It never changes randomly and without reason. There's always some thinking that occurs before it. My example to all of you is that we have 100 people on this who have registered for this webinar today, and none of us woke up this morning on a diet. It didn't just happen to us. It wasn't a behaviour that changed as we got out of bed this morning that we decided to pour a bowl of muesli instead of have an egg and bacon roll. It was something that if that behaviour changes, it has to be preceded by a different set of thinking. It might be that something has occurred, so we might have seen a photo of ourselves 5 years ago when we were a little skinnier, or we might have seen an infomercial at 1:30 in the morning that prompted us to lose weight, and we make some changes in our behaviour and actually go to the supermarket, buy the muesli, and then get out of bed in the morning and pour it into our bowl. So what we need to think about is when we do go with a punitive way of working with young people, what thinking are we creating, and is that thinking in its nature negative or positive? And as a result, is it likely to lead to a positive improvement in behaviour and engagement? So our job through the way that we work with young people is to create as much positive thinking as we can, such that it leads to a positive improvement in behaviour. One of the things about consequences also is that it drives the behaviour underground. Now this is a problem for me, because one of the things I know, having reflected upon my own work and my own behaviour in working with young people, is actually that I'm incredibly gullible. I will fall for stories, and if students come back in after lunch and tell me that they're late because there was a UFO that landed in the yard, I'm likely to be sucked into that for a few minutes. And but if I take a punitive approach to even kids not telling me the truth, what happens is that they get better at lying. And as someone so purely gullible as I am, having kids in my classroom who are actively focused on coming up with better lies is not something that I should be encouraging, and not something that will create the sort of climate that will allow me to do my very best work. One of the reasons that we really need to avoid the punishment and consequences trap on its own is that it reinforces negative labels. So once we do actually convince certain students in our classroom that they are a liar, the whole likelihood is that they will become better at it. What we know about those labels is once we assign them to ourselves, or we've had them assigned by others, that what we do is we begin to live up to those labels. So what we want to do is to place positive labels on our young people and have them think positive things about themselves, such that the behaviours that sit under that label will match it. And probably when it comes to consequences and punishment, one of the things that's a genuine problem is that it takes an inordinate amount of time. It leads to inconsistency. You just can't, from day to day, dole out punishments and consequences with any consistency. Anybody who follows any of the major sporting codes will be any of the major football codes will be really clear about that in terms of tribunals and judiciaries, and the amount of water cooler conversation that can be generated through the inconsistency about the way that certain punishments are handing out, and it's absolutely exhausting. And the reason I say that to you is that the way that we're wired in terms of behaviour change is if we are to change through punishments and consequences, is that they must be delivered every single time. And we know this because, as an example, I think out of the 100 people who are here today, I would suggest that if you're typical of most groups, that there's a chance that you may have, if you drove to work today, you may have crept at some stage over the speed limit by 2 or 3 kilometres. And there's also a high likelihood that you didn't get caught. And well, not yet anyway. So there's a chance that in a couple of weeks you'll get that envelope, and we know that envelope. It's a bad-looking envelope, and we know it's bad news before we open it. We open it carefully, and they build the suspense on you by making sure that the letter that's inside is folded into 3 sections, and the top section, as you pull it out in the envelope, will tell you what you did wrong. It'll tell you that you were 63 in a 60-kilometre zone today. And then if you open it up and you see inside there that the fine is $15,000, you're likely to have a little bit of a heart attack and then get on the warpath. You're going to get out there and you're going to talk to lawyers, you're going to talk to media, you're going to talk to the Ombudsman, you're going to talk to local members to make sure that this amazing injustice is fought. And our children, when they get that sort of punishment thrown at them, when they didn't know it was coming, they do the same thing. They rail hard against it. And the reason is because they're constantly testing to see what's going on. And when they get a surprise in that test, it's not something that arrives well with them. Again, to use a little bit of a sporting analogy, the whole concept of rules and punishments and penalties for breaching rules, changing behaviour, it makes us think about AFL football and the fact that when it was first invented, there were only 10 rules. And it was very easy, therefore, to umpire the game. In fact, they actually didn't have umpires. The very first games of AFL football were played and umpired by the captains. And that's because the rules are very simple and very easy to follow. But now, with a very, very long and thick rule book in place in AFL football, we have the issue of needing up to 9 or 10 umpires involved in an AFL game to ensure that player behaviour changes, because they keep testing us. They keep pushing a little bit in the back, or they keep tripping people over and just seeing if they'll get caught by the officials that are there. It is exhausting to change behaviour through through rules and through consequences and through punishments. So what we're saying is, can we come up with a different way? Can we come up with a different way of being able to generate behaviour improvement in young people by looking at the ways that we are wired to change behaviour? And that's what restorative practices is all about. Where does it come from? Is this just a theory? Is this just a concept that somebody's thought up in a way that could be packaged up and delivered to schools? And probably the thing I love about restorative practices is that I don't certainly see restorative practices that way. It's embedded in some very strong research around a very contentious and a difficult topic to talk about, and that's shame. And I often ask people, is there a place for shame in our schools? And generally the answer that I get is no, schools should not be a place where we experience shame. And I'm here today firstly to say my first provocative thing of the day, and that is that I absolutely believe that there is a place for shame in our schools. The problem is that we've come to view shame as being a very stigmatising, very humiliating kind of experience, such as the one that's being experienced by the little fella that you can see in the picture on the screen now. And shame doesn't have to be that way. In fact, shame is just a normal emotion. Shame's and as a completely normal and natural emotion, it has a responsibility. It has a role to fulfil in our being, and in the same way that many other negative emotions have a role to play. So, for instance, fear has a very negative. It feels negative. It feels a whole bunch of different kinds of awful, but it has a job, and its job is to keep us safe. So fear's job is to tell us when there's trouble, to not think at this point, but to act, and to make sure we aren't using the neocortex part of our brain, but we're using the limbic system of our brain, which triggers our fight or flight mechanism. And so it has an incredibly important role to play in that regard, and we need to acknowledge it, and we need to make sure that, you know, if we do experience fear, that we know that there's action that needs to be taken. And it's the same with shame. So what we're trying to do through shame is to say how can we have our young people experience shame in a way that's supportive, and in a way that's respectful. So it is hugely important for our young people to experience shame, and the main reason that it is so important is we need to think about, what does shame do? What's its job? What its job is to enact our conscience. Shame's job is to make sure that we have an opportunity to listen to the angel on our shoulder rather than the devil on our shoulder. And we know this, and I have to be honest here, I've experienced this as a teacher. I remember a fella that I was teaching who was a really lovely kid, but was probably best described as my class clown. Never did anything nasty, just always had it for everything. And one day I think he probably joked once too often, and I lost it. And I was a young teacher and learning the caper and feeling under pressure, and I gave it to him. He really got both barrels from me. And as I finished my rant, I remember, you know, very much seeing the look on his face and seeing that it was a look of fear, and that wasn't something that I wanted to generate in my classroom. And I walked away from that conversation and went to recess. And there was certainly this dynamic of an angel and a devil on my shoulder. I had an opportunity here to listen to the angel who was telling me, you know what, that behaviour doesn't match up with what you believe about working with young people. It's not on, and you need to do something to fix that. And then I had the devil on my shoulder who was telling me he so deserved that. Don't worry about it. Go get a coffee. And we've got choices at this point about which one we listen to. And without conscience, without shame, we listen to the devil. And if we can experience shame in a positive way, knowing that we can do something about it, then we will listen to the angel. And the great part is that when you do begin to listen to the angel, we start to do something about it rather than dwell on it. And all I needed to do in that instance was make a very genuine and sincere apology. And then I was able to move forward in that relationship with that young student and get back on track, which was always which was critical to him being able to continue to learn. Just going to pause for a moment here. I'm just seeing that there's some comments and things like that through the question section here. I'm just saying there's a few. I'm just trying to see how I can get a good look at these questions for a moment. Yep, okay, so Mark's asking us here about the difference between thinking and choice. I believe that, Mark, the thinking leads towards consciousness around choice. So I like to think about taking steps backwards from the experience, and I think that between thinking and behaviour is that choice. So I think that we need to go a little further back from choice towards thinking to be able to get the right choices and behaviours made. And I'm just noticing here also that Belinda has her hand up. So Belinda, I'm just going to defer to you for just a moment. It might be an accidental hand up, in which case I shan't embarrass you, but I'm just going to unmute you for a minute, Belinda. Belinda, are you there? Just check in on Belinda one last time. It appears that perhaps...
It was a mistake. Can you hear me?
Yes, I've got you, Belinda. It was an accidental hand up.
Yes, thank you.
They happen in the classroom all the time, don't they? We'll just mute Belinda back again and keep rolling. So let's start to get clear on the second myth of restorative practices, and this one drives me absolutely nuts. It's the idea that it takes too long. And what we get here is the perpetuated notion that what restorative practice is about, getting out a set of questions that we need to use whenever a student makes a behaviour choice that we don't like, of any level, and that's not what this is all about. So what we need to do is to bust this myth right now, is that the restorative practices takes too long. I'm going to give you an example in just a few minutes of a time that it has actually saved me an inordinate amount of time. And the way that we can get clear about using restorative practices in a way that it saves you time is to think about the restorative practices continuum. So along the continuum, we have a set of different stages that we might like to consider in terms of what our response needs to be, and that response needs to be commensurate to the frequency of the problem behaviour as well, and it needs to also, you need to think about then about the time investment that we're giving considering the frequency. So at the very informal end, I'm suggesting to you that we're thinking about the low-level behaviours. We're thinking about the things that happen, over and over again in the day that we need to deal with. An example that I always talk about is, for instance, a student might be dropping a piece of rubbish on the ground, or might be pulling a little face, such as the lovely fellow that you can see under the affective statement end. And at the formal end, we're talking about issues that don't happen very often. They're very serious issues. They're very high level in terms of their impact and the harm on the relationships around the school, and therefore the investment of time is a little higher in that regard. So what we want to do there is invest more time at the formal end, but we'll need to do it less often. And then we want to invest at the informal end a very small amount of time, because we've got to do it more often. So let's get clear on that. Let's get really clear on what it means to work along that continuum. So the first one here is the whole idea of an affective statement. Now what you'll notice is that in thinking about an affective statement is that it is a statement. At this stage, I'm not looking for a conversation. I'm not looking for a big interaction. I'm not looking to ask multiple questions. What I'm asking here is, can I chuck in a feeling? So for most people, if I go back to that example of a low-level behaviour such as dropping a piece of paper on the ground, most of us have a very similar default position, and that's the position of saying something like, pick that up. And that's understandable. It's a very, we're trying to deal with it very quickly, because it's a sort of level of behaviour that can happen many times in a day. Perhaps I've had some teachers tell me that the need for an effective statement can pop up in their day as many as 50 times. And that's absolutely legit. So we want to be able to do something really, really quick. So I'm asking here for 1 to 3 seconds of your time. And what I'm saying there is that, can we throw in a feeling? Can we do something informal, as remember, a real throwaway line like chuck in a feeling at the effective statement level? So can we do something, instead of saying pick that up, could we say, disappoints me to see you do that, it needs to go in the bin? And it's a small investment more of your time, maybe between 1 and 3 seconds, extra couple of words, but most of you would be able to tell me that the most important word that I said in that statement was disappoint. And it seems like such a small thing. But what we need to remember is that there are 50 opportunities in a day to be able to use that. Now, if there are 20 teachers in your school, that presents 1,000 opportunities to use effective statements in a day. And for some of us, we're talking about schools with 40 teachers or 100 teachers, and that multiplies exponentially as a result of that. And even if you've got 1,000 a day, that's 5,000 in a week. So 5,000 opportunities to just throw in a feeling, and that's without getting your parent community involved, and without getting your support staff involved, and without getting your leadership involved. It's enormous. And so what we believe is that in terms of building culture, in terms of looking at the behaviours that we want to both encourage and the behaviours that we don't wish to tolerate as our culture building focus, we believe that in not wanting to tolerate these behaviours, if we can just invest a small amount of time that we could, perhaps by Chinese water torture, that we could teach your young people that their behaviour has an impact on others. And that's what we want them to do, because that means we're turning on that switch of empathy. Empathy, as we know, is one of the most significant impactors and contributors in terms of young people who are able to go and lead in the workforce further down the track, is if they can understand what experiences might be like for other people. So critically important that we're able to teach them empathy, and this is the best way to do it. Look at all those small things that happen, and can we train ourselves to throw in a feeling. So I'm going to it's got some reference there to the operating domain. So I'm going to ask you to think out which domain you might place yourself in for this as we work towards that concept. The next one I want you to think about is an effective interaction. This is what I describe as the quick one-on-one. And here it's a little bit further along. And I guess thinking about the fact that we've got a large proportion of primary teachers in the room in the webinar today, what I might prompt you to think about is the idea that you might have that 10 minutes of explicit instruction, for instance, at the start of a lesson, and during that time you've done a couple of effective statements with one particular student to try and let them know that you're a bit disappointed with their behaviour, or that it's affecting you or it's affecting others in some negative way. But it's not working, and the young person that you're working with is just not getting the hint. And so what we're trying to do here is to say, can we have a quick interaction? Once you can get the rest of the class to work, can we have a quick interaction with this young person to be able to show them that because we need to invest a bit more time to get this behaviour to change. So it's the investment of your time that I'm asking for here is somewhere around 1 to 3 minutes, and we're going to move quickly through a process. Instead of telling what we've been experiencing, and instead of telling this young person what we're going to do, we're going to ask a couple of quick questions that move us quickly from past to present to future. Our model for the way we handle these conversations is often very anchored in the past. And so what we want to do now is to be able to say, can we move with some sort of, with some sort of evenness from past to present to future? So you might ask questions such as, so what was that all about? And the great part about asking that question, and if you can get comfortable with the silence that will come after that question, because it's actually quite important at this moment to spare a young person out, because they've got some defaults here too. If we ask them what was that all about, we're likely to get a shrug of the shoulders or maybe an I don't know. And we need to wait at that point and just say, okay, no worries, I'll give you a moment to think about it. Because here what we're doing is through that question of what was that all about, we're inviting the young person to think about their behaviour. When we just send them to a corner, or we just move them, or we just tell them off, they don't have to think about their behaviour. And thinking is absolutely critical, as we pointed out before, to a change in behaviour. So we're inviting them to think about their behaviour. We then might ask them, so how do you think that's affecting me and everybody else in the room? And we might get some begrudging answers around, oh, you're sad, and they're a bit boring, those answers at first, which can be a frustration. The great part is that through repeated exposure to these questions, they start to become more articulate and more revealing of their emotional intelligence. So I can tell that you're really upset about that, and Jane, who's sitting next to me, must be really frustrated, which is just wonderful when they can develop that kind of understanding that their behaviour is affecting other people. And then the next question is more, well, what are you going to do about it? So instead of us being the people who are saying what we're going to do is be responsible for the change in your behaviour, we're asking them what they're going to do to fix this problem. And it might be as simple as something like I'm going to pull my head in, or it might be that, I'm going to go and make an apology, I'm going to fix things up, or I'm going to, make up my learning to recess. And so the problem here when I said that myth about the whole notion that it takes too long is that at this point people are often leaping straight to the restorative questions. And what you'll notice, I think, out of today is that I will spend, this is probably the slide that I'm going to put on your screen today for the smallest amount of time. And that is that because I think that far too often we lean on these questions as a crutch. And at this point, we don't want to go through every single question here. My encouragement to you around using the restorative questions is very much to use them as a guide rather than a script. I want you to know that if you need to rip a couple of questions out of here because you need to move quickly at this point, go for it. And if you think that you need to stop and pause because we've got time to do that, and now's a good time to be able to have a good conversation about restorative practices, then you know what, do that too. I'm happy for you to spend a bit more time. So for instance, that second question for kids who've done the wrong thing, if you do decide to pause with a Year 5 boy and ask him what were you thinking about at the time, there's an incredibly high likelihood that there are only two possible answers the first time he answers that question. And that will be, I don't know, and nothing. And you know what, at this point, you might not jump straight away to what have you thought about since. You might say, you know what, would it have been useful if you did some thinking at the time? And they'll pull an odd face where they'll look up and slightly to the left and then up and slightly to the right, and they might give you something incredibly intelligent and articulate such as, yeah. And it's really, honestly, it seems such a small thing, but it's so exciting. It's just so exciting when you realise what we've done for the first time is prompt a young person to thinking before they act can also make a really big difference. So, I really encourage you to use these in a very creative and a very context-specific kind of way. And if you need to jump over a couple of questions, all you need to do at the end of any effective interaction with a young person is put your hand on your heart and say, did I actually go past, present, future? And if you've done that using questions that are available to you as well as your own set of techniques in questioning and working with young people, then I say bravo to you, well done. The next step is the small impromptu conference. So this is when we're talking about group issues that come up. So I've chuckled to myself that about the last 2 or 3 schools I've spoken to around when do they think is the time that they want to get better at using restorative practices. They often tell me that it's after lunch, that as students come back in after their time outside, particularly on a nice hot steamy day, that all of the problems have occurred right near the end of lunchtime, and they need to deal with that. If they don't deal with it, that it's going to wreck the whole of the last learning session. I certainly learned this as a principal. I had a problem. If I'm really honest, and that was that the Year 6 girls. I believe that every teacher, if you came to my last webinar, you'll know that I believe that every teacher and every school leader has a superpower, and that they also have a kryptonite. And I know full well what kryptonite is, and it's Year 6 girls. They are an amazing beast, Year 6 girls, well capable, in fact far more capable than any other species or creature on the planet, of anchoring a conversation in the past. And if they came to me, they were certainly coming to me after lunch, because they weren't coming at the start of lunch because that might interfere with their wonderful lunchtime. They were coming at the end of lunch well armed with the notion that if they could just make this conversation all about the past, then they could possibly use up the entire last learning session of the day. It would be an hour of my life that I would never, ever get back. And I realised that this is so counterproductive. Not only was it taking an hour to deal with a conversation with half a dozen Year 6 girls about their social dynamic, but I also was getting to the end of that hour and realising that I'd gone absolutely nowhere. And so what I decided was that I needed some structure about how I was going to be restorative in this regard. And that structure for me was my whiteboard in my office, and it was for those small impromptu conferences that just come up there that we need to deal with. And I'm just really advising for a teacher crowd there that I've got a typo in the word impromptu, which you should never do when you're working with teachers. So if I could get that elephant in the room dealt with, and encourage you to think about the content rather than the typo for a moment, that'd be marvellous. So what I did was set up a whiteboard that I had up in my office and also on a whiteboard near the Year 5, 6 area. And it had 3 sections on it. It had P3, P3, F3. And for the first P3, I would ask the girls, so girls, we're going to talk about this for 3 minutes. Tell me what happened. And I would hear all sorts of things in there and about what's been happening, and some of it dating well back to times when to years earlier than year 6. And then at the end of 3 minutes I would stop them and say, girls, we're now going to talk about the present. And they were determined. They would tell me, no, but I haven't told you about the time when I was in year 2 that her mum glared at my mum at netball on Saturday morning. And I would say, you know what, we've just missed our opportunity though. Because I do firmly believe that if they can't get to the nub of the problem in the first 3 minutes, then it's probably on the peripheral of the problem. Let's talk about the real issues here. So for 3 minutes in the P3, in the middle section of my whiteboard, I'll start to make notes about how this is affecting people. What's the present? What's the damage? What's the harm? And I would hear about how they were feeling angry, how they were feeling annoyed, how they were feeling left out, how they were feeling frustrated, how they were feeling sad. And then I would stop them after 3 minutes again and say, now we need to talk about the future, F3. How are we going to fix it? And they would start to tell me what their plan is to make it right again. And I might put a little asterisk against one of the actions in there, which might be an action for me, such as, well, I'll check in on you on Friday and see how this is working, and then I would send them back to class. And so instead of that being an hour of my time, it was actually 9 minutes of my time, perhaps 10 minutes by the time I put the whiteboard in action. So we're talking about time investment for that middle level stuff, but I still want you to be able to deal with this in approximately 10 minutes or so, making sure that restorative practices, after all, should serve your learning program rather than intrude upon it. The next one I want to talk to you about very briefly is the whole idea of large group work, and that's the notion of getting kids together in circles. So circles are really important, and the reason we use circles is not because it's some warm and fluffy circle of trust that we're looking to build. It's because there are no powerful positions when you're using circles, which is really exciting. And because it means that we walk away from that dynamic where people try to be more powerful, or indeed when young people try and hide through their position in the classroom. So when we do stand in a circle, you don't have to be holding hands. That what it does is it puts us all on a very even footing and gives people the chance to contribute in a really even way, and it maximises the participation of young people who perhaps would not be so keen to participate otherwise. There are 5 types of circles that I'd like to bring to your attention today, and they're the easiest ways for me to get started. Now, like I said, I'm flying today. I'm covering as much restorative work as I possibly can in a short space of time, but I want to let you know that in about 2 minutes' time you'll be fully qualified to have a go with restorative circles. It's called practices for a reason. Just practice it. Just practice and practice and practice. So check-in circles are our social and emotional dipstick. They're when we're finding out what's happening with our young people, just through a quick check-in. I've got a fabulous teacher I work with who tells me that she can get a check-in circle done with her Year 10 students, 25 Year 10 students. She can get that check-in circle done. A 2-word check-in is what she does. She goes, have a think about whether it's too negative, too positive, or one of each. And she asks them at the start of the day to just fly around the circle and tell us what those 2 words are. And she reckons that her record for that is 31 seconds. She can get a whole class check-in done in 31 seconds, which is just amazing. And she tells me, though, that also every check-in circle that she does will often lead to about 3 effective interactions. Where somebody might say that they're feeling angry and tired, well, they wouldn't normally say that, and therefore she'll go and have a quick chat with them about, hey, what's going on there? Someone might say that they're feeling really excited, and she'll go and have a chat with them as well, because something really fantastic might happen in their lives that she wants to celebrate. And for me, that's really important. I once had a young fellow that I was working with who got to day 4, got to Thursday, of butting heads with me, and I was using technical teacher jargon such as saying, he's off, there's something off about him. And I got to Thursday afternoon, and it was only then that another teacher informed me that this young fellow's parents had split up on the weekend. Here I was thinking he was just providing me with some challenging behaviour to deal with. The truth is, all I needed to do was check in and find out, to be able to adjust, support, and get him back into a high expectation situation. Check-out circles are great for the past, for reflecting back on what's been happened, what's been learned, and what our effort and what our work ethic has been like. Preparation circles are wonderful for changes and for special events such as camps and excursions, and also for letting your students know how perhaps the day should go when you're going to be away. I've got a funny feeling that we might have a couple of people in there in the webinar today who have that class, who each relief teachers, and it's really important to prepare students for a change such as you being away when you have the opportunity. Response circles might be for responding, for instance, to the class that has eaten a relief teacher, but it also can be things like you might have a student in your class who's lost a family member, and you want to respond in some way as a group. And then you've got learning circles, and they're great opportunities to be able to introduce new content through circles, find out what kids know, what kids want to learn, how they want to learn more about the topic that you're going to introduce, including, as I think Mark has pointed out for us again at some stage here, explicit teaching of restorative practices. So it seems counterproductive, doesn't it, to teach restorative practices but to not do it through a circle. So I can't encourage you more strongly, if you are going to talk to kids about restorative practices, talk to them about it in a circle. Get them used to both the product and the process as we move forward. And then one thing I don't want to touch on much today, other than to let you know that it's there, is the concept of a formal conference. It's for our most severe behaviours, or perhaps our most severe incidents or ongoing incidents that have caused a high level of harm, a high level of angst, a high level of emotional tension in relationships, and that's available to schools. It's a high investment of time because it's a low frequency event, and so we take time here. This is where we do use the questions as script, and where we do stick very strictly to preparing absolutely every person who's going to be in on that conference. We get the people there who have been affected, and we find out how it's affected them, and give young people the chance to do something about that in moving forward. I suggest to schools that are working on restorative practices that this could be a return from inspection type process, such that it happens very, very little. But you know what, guys, it's really the easiest thing about restorative practices for me is the reflective tool that is provided through the restorative operating domains. And what they allow us to do is to think about, am I balancing, as I mentioned right at the start of today's webinar, am I balancing firmness and fairness? You know, firmness is all about the expectations, about the boundaries, about the pressure that we put on kids to do the right thing, because you know what, we do want to have high expectations of their behaviour. And in fact, in this model, I would suggest to you that very, very little behaviour will change in the bottom half of it. It changes in the top half where the expectations are high, but it gives it its best chance to change when we have a high level of fairness involved too. So what we find is that when we're high on ruleness, high on the strictness, high on the firmness, we find ourselves doing things to kids all the time. We're quite authoritarian in the way that we work. We assume power in the classroom the same way that a dictator might. When we're low and low, we tend to be not doing much at all. And look, I do tell people that looks like an awful place to go, but it's actually a place that all of us have been. That, you know, often, you know, it'll be a Friday afternoon in about week 9 of term 4 that you'll trudge back to your classroom at about 1:30 in the afternoon and go, oh man, I'm so putting a video on today. And I'm not a fan of that. I'm not a fan of us putting a video on and taking the foot off the pedal at all, but I do know where it comes from. And just occasionally we do need to take the foot off the pedal and become a little bit passive in the classroom and just let everyone take a little breather for all of our own well-being's sake, but just occasionally. So I tell people this is, the not box is educational Fiji. You can go there for a holiday, but you can't live there. And when we go all fairness, when we bring in all the support, all the encouragement, all the nurturing, but the expectations are low, we find ourselves doing things for our students all the time. And you know, you're tying the shoelaces of your 6 kids, and that's not okay. You know, that's not equipping our young people to be able to meet the high expectations that not only our schools but the world will have for them. Where we get this right is when we get in the with box, and we acknowledge that, you know, we're trying to build high level of relationships here. We're respectful both in the way that we're behaving and the way that we're conducting ourselves and the way that we're practicing with our young people. But we also have taken a position of high authority. It's just that we've taken it in an authoritative kind of way rather than an authoritarian kind of way. And look, you'll slip. There'll be times when you'll slip out of the with box. I know. I've reflected upon this myself, and I know that when I make a mistake, I tend to slip to the 2 box. I tend to get all gruff and I turn the loud principal voice on. I also know as a parent that I slip to the 4 box, and I start to solve my own children's problems for them rather than solving problems with them. And there'll also be times when you will need to move. There are times when there might be safety involved. need to do something to a young person, like use that strong voice or take the chair out of the hand that they're about to hit someone with, or remove other students, and later on we'll move this back to the with box. And there'll be times when you will need to do something for your young people if they're in distress, if they've had a death in their family, if there's a situation that's genuinely a problem for them. And what we'll do is we'll do something for them. We'll roll in a bit of extra support, encouragement and nurturing, and then over a time-appropriate frame, we'll bring the expectation back into the with box. Sometimes it's serious and takes longer, sometimes it's short-term, and you can move very quickly back to the with box. But this, honestly, guys, is just a reflective tool, and that's what it's all about. And you can reflect upon this when you get in your car at the end of the day. You can reflect upon it in the shower in the morning. You can reflect upon it at the traffic lights on the way home. And that's the wonderful part of it, because reflection upon nothing is crazy. You wouldn't put on makeup or shave in front of a wall. You would always use a mirror. You need a tool if you're going to reflect, and this is the very best reflective tool that I can possibly imagine for you. Andy, I think you're absolutely right. Even the preps do understand when we get fair income about the whole idea of moving to a model that isn't so punitive and consequence based, but is about the way that we want to work together, and they understand that they'll get better behaviour that way. So look, I feel like I've barely taken a breath today, guys, so it is actually really important that I give you the opportunity, like I said at the start, that I would fly like crazy and hope that some of the drops from the hose actually make their way into your system and nourish you and keep you hydrated. But I do want to let you know that if today was interesting at all to you, if today struck a chord with you, if today the drops tasted good and you would like a little bit more, that we've created an opportunity where you wouldn't get just an hour of this, but you'd get a whole day of restorative practices training. And I really want you to think about what might be possible in that regard. I don't like to make today any sort of infomercial, but if you're thinking about restorative practices as a pathway forward, and you don't come to the Restorative Practices Teacher Training Day that we're organising in Melbourne, if you can't get to Melbourne on that day, then I reckon you're crazy. This is a great opportunity to learn how you can use restorative practices such that it's not too soft and such that it doesn't take too long, and we want to give you the chance to do that. So in the question box or the chat box, if the PL day around restorative practices is something that you might be interested in, then all I want you to do is type in that box PL. Put the letters PL in there, and we're going to make sure that you get this flyer and rego form, and that you get the link to the Eventbrite section, the Eventbrite site where you can register straight away. I don't like running restorative practices for training for a large group. I don't think it lends itself particularly well to a conference type situation. So we've got limited seating here. This needs to be a really conversational kind of day. We need to make sure that you get the opportunity to, we need to make sure that you get the opportunity to make sense of this. So there'll be a very deliberate focus in that day on being able to not only learn about restorative practices, but to be able to contextualise it, and that will be a very clear determination of the day that you'll get out of the day. So you're going to learn how to not only build a restorative practices classroom, how to deal with all levels of behaviour, and how to use restorative practices very much as a tool for prevention rather than cure, which is where it gets really, really exciting if I'm genuinely honest about that. So that's one opportunity that you might have. If you're here today thinking that, we're thinking about restorative practices for our school, we've got about 45 schools now around Australia in partnerships working with real schools around improving their school culture. You can go to the Real Schools website and click on the partnership page that you can see in front of you there, when I'm not pulling quite such a ridiculous face in the video that will explain in less than 10 minutes what a Real Schools partnership is all about. We have about 50% of our schools now on partnerships that are based in restorative practices. Isn't that incredible that we've got, of all of the schools that are working on school culture, 50% of them have identified that restorative practices is the very best way to be able to build that partnership. So if you think that a partnership that we work together over 12, 24 and 36 months in your school, where we not only provide a really high quality professional learning experience, but we work in class with your teachers at the coalface with your students. We get your parent community involved through sessions for parents. We mentor your leaders around getting the implementation plan right. We provide some targeted teacher coaching. So this is no drop and run approach. So if we're not going to run PD in your school and then run away and hope that the applause lasts. We know that you're going to hit barriers with this stuff because there is no quick fix, and we roll in coaching opportunities. We provide articles every month for your leaders and for your teachers. We provide video resources too, because not everybody feels like reading it all the time, and sometimes the best professional learning is done when you're sitting on the couch having a glass of wine on a Friday night. So there's lots of opportunities to be able to transform your school, and if you think that a partnership might be something that your school's ready to start to think about, like all those other schools around Australia, then just pop the word partnership in the question box there. There's no obligation. Once you put the word partnership there, that doesn't mean we send you an invoice. That would be crazy. What we are saying, though, is that if you think that it would be interesting to have a conversation about that, just pop the word partnership in there, and then we're going to get back in touch with you. So, Janet, I'm just looking at your question here. At the moment, we don't have plans to run these days anywhere outside of Melbourne at the moment. We're just sort of starting with it. All of the Real Schools work is very much about going long term. So the whole idea of running workshops is something that I'm just testing at the moment, because what I want to do is make sure that people know that Restorative Practices is a journey rather than an event. And so, Janet, we won't be running them outside of Melbourne at the moment, but get in touch with me, perhaps, Janet, at info@realschools.com.au, and we'll have a chat about how perhaps we could access your people to a little bit more training. Yes, so put PL or partnership in that box. We're going to make that conversation happen for you. If you think today's interesting at all, have a bit of a look at the Real Schools website. Have a look around at all the resources that are available there. Have a look at the different. We've got a coaching program up and running. We've got the Teacher Fast Track is a really exciting program that many of you might be interested in. A 12-month commitment to helping your teachers to be able to move forward through practice, not only around restorative practices, but around 9 other different topics too. So get in there and have a bit of a surf around and have a bit of a squeeze and see what works best for you. And then I just wanted to let you know about the next webinar we're running. You may have noticed that what we do with our Real Schools webinars is we run we run alternate webinars. So we run a teacher practice focused webinar, and then we always the next month run a leadership focused webinar. And the next webinar that we're going to run for May is going to be our Performance Conversations That Work webinar. I'm amazed how often I speak to school leaders around Australia who find that whole tick and flick approach to performance management, for lack of a better term here, a frustration, and we want that to stop. So we're going to kill off tick and flick performance management, and we're going to start to talk about what would be the features of a performance conversation at work. So we're going to send all of you a link to be able to register for that webinar, and you're more than welcome to register yourself, and certainly very, very welcome to pass that on to your school leaders for a bit of a chat too. So I'm mindful that I said that I would give some time for questions. Mark, you have your hand up, and I very much appreciate it. I'm going to unmute you, Mark, for just a moment. Have I got you there, Mark? Mark, can you hear me?
You there, Adam?
I am here, Mark. You've got a
question.
Can you hear me, Adam?
Yeah, I've got you. Yeah, no, I do. It's a question. We've been using restorative practices for some time, and up here in Queensland, and one of the things that is a constant discussion in the classroom environment is just, and I'd love to get your take on it, like from the viewpoint that you've been working with it for a while too, is how long is too long to leave a reaction to a behaviour that needs an interaction in class? So how long do you think, do you react immediately every time, or do you react, let's say a kid's I don't know, annoying someone by poking someone with a pencil?
Yes.
Do you instantly react, or do you give a non-verbal cue, or what? Is there a time frame that's too long to leave it, I guess, is the question I'm asking.
Yeah, no, it's a really good question, a really relevant one, because one of the things that we do know about, most teachers will tell us that it's quite intuitive to them. They know they need to follow through. And the truth is we get a little bit obsessed about the whole idea of following through at the time. We've got to get it at the time. What we know about primary age students in particular is that we've got a window for following through that is around 48 hours. So, and often the best time to deal with the behaviour, even in a restorative way, is not at that very moment, because the limbic system has kicked in, amygdala has decided that you won't be thinking at the time, that you're going to be reacting emotionally. So by using that 48-hour window, and it doesn't have to be that you take 48 hours, but most kids will know what you're talking about, even if it's 48 hours later. They'll say, remember when that happened the other day? And they'll go, yeah. So we've got a window about 48 hours to deal with most behaviours, particularly as they move up the continuum. The more severe the behaviour, the more likely it is that they're going to be able to engage with genuine thought and genuine action as a result of that behaviour, and we've got a window to be able to do it. Sometimes too, by giving ourselves a little time, we turn our own neocortex and less our limbic system back on as well, and we'll make better decisions about the way that we'll question and not just what questions we'll ask. Does that make sense, Mark?
Yeah. Yeah, that's excellent, Adam. And I guess the other side, and one of the things that totally goes along the same line as what I'm of the belief, and I've said to teachers also, that if they leave it, what happens is it actually empowers the statement and makes them feel more, because they've remembered something 24 hours later, which that student thought was just a little thing that happened in class. And that was one of the things that I've said to teachers who do that as well, and I think it's a really good thing to do. So thanks for that. It's great feedback.
No problem at all. I think that it's far more important that we follow through than when we follow through. Okay, we might leave it at that today, guys. We have run out of time. I thank you so much. If there are questions that you have that you've put in that question box today, I am going to scoop those up. And if you have put in there about the Professional Learning Day or partnership for your school, we're going to make sure you get that information too. And if you want to get in touch with Real Schools, you see it's an easy thing to do. Just go to the website, have a surf around, send us an email at info@realschools.com. or give us .com.au, or give us a call. We're really happy to talk to you. Thanks so much, everyone. Go and make those restorative classrooms strong classrooms, and we look forward to chatting with you again at another time. Okie doke. Bye for now.